This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our guest throughout African American History Month, author, publisher, cultural historian, educational consultant, the founder and director of the IKG Cultural Resources, and the current director of the Asa Restoration Project. He is the first African American to fund and coordinate an archaeological dig in Egypt and has led more than 30 archaeological missions to Egypt since 2009. And in fact, the Asa Restoration Project is funding the excavation and restoration of 3 25th dynasty tombs of Kushite noblemen on the West Bank of Luxor, Egypt. Prolific author and lecturer Anthony Browder joins us once again. Hotep, brother.
Hotep, man, thank you for having me back.
You know, I want to start right there. We came up saying Hotep.
Yes.
And just for a minute, just in terms of some current cultural stuff, that some have now turned that word, unfortunately, into a pejorative. And that I don't like that. But talk to us about the meaning of that term, what it really means and why we say it.
Hotep is an ancient African word that originated in Kemet, the country that we now call Egypt. It means peace. There is a man who lived around 2700 BC by the name of Imhotep. Imhotep means he who comes in peace. Imhotep is recorded in history as the world's first multi-genius. Imhotep was the person responsible for creating, designing, and overseeing the construction of the step pyramid of Zoser in the city of Saqqara. That is the first man-made structure of stone in history. Imhotep is also recorded in history as the world's first physician. He was a philosopher. He was the vizier to the king Zoser. He was a poet who gave us the statement, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die." So this word Hotep honors this multi-genius, and that word should be used with profound reverence. You know, but we live in a society where our world has literally been turned upside down, where the N-word is a term of endearment now, and peace is something to be frowned upon. So these are crazy times, brother.
And so when we say multi-genius, it was because he could master all of those different disciplines, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Some people compare him to Da Vinci or Edison, but we have to put history in its proper context. We can say, or we should say, that Da Vinci was a European version of Imhotep, or Edison was a white version of Imhotep. Context is everything.
Kind of like people who say Josh Gibson was the black Babe Ruth, rather than say Babe Ruth was the white Josh Gibson.
Absolutely.
I'll give you another one. People used to say that Billy Eckstine was the black Frank Sinatra. I think even Frank said, I might be the white Billy Eckstine.
Frank told the truth.
Right. In terms of these terms, the last time we talked, you mentioned the Sphinx, and we all know that term, the Sphinx. But then you used another name for it. Talk to us about that, because I think it's important we understand the actual language and terminologies that we use. And is not the language we use when we talk about Kemet the language of the Meta Nature?
Sure. Well, thought precedes speech. So we have to realize that most of the names of African people, places, and things have been changed by non-African people, i.e. Europeans. So when we use European names to describe African people, we're viewing them through a European lens, as opposed to having the capacity to interpret them or to feel them through the names and through the spirit that was given them by African people.
More MIP after this message.
Sphinx is a Greek word. It means to strangle or to hold. The African name for that statue is Her-Im-Akhet. Her-Im-Akhet means Heru, on the horizon. Heru was the son of Asar and Aset, the founding parents of ancient Kemet. Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks called Egypt. Another Greek term that we use quite often is the word pyramid. The Kemetic word for that structure is mir, M-I-R. And so if you understand what mir means, it helps to give more meaning to that structure. They tell us that pyramids were tombs and that pharaohs were buried in tombs. That is a lie. There are 118 pyramids or mir in Egypt today, and none of them, zero, have a tomb. Zero. Mir were always built over tombs. The tombs were underneath. Mir then are like tombstones placed over a grave. So what does the word mir mean? Mir means the place of ascension. The place of ascension. Mir were built over tombs in order to facilitate the ascension of the soul buried beneath it into heaven, where that soul would be reborn. So as a result of conscious African people pushing the envelope and reclaiming our names, that has now forced European Egyptologists, some European Egyptologists, to begin to refer to mir as resurrection machines, which is in fact what they were.
Resurrection machines.
Resurrection machines, structures, architectural structures designed to resurrect the soul of the deceased in the tomb into a specific region of heaven. And we also know where in heaven those souls were projected. Those souls were projected into a constellation that we refer to today by its Greek name, Orion. But the Kemetic name for that constellation, which can be readily identified by 7 stars, particularly 3 stars that form the belt of Orion. In Kemet, that star system was known as Sahu, and it was the first star in the belt of Sahu, which was the region in heavens where all souls went to be reborn. So the word mummy is a Arabic word, which describes one of the materials that was used in order to mummify or funeralize a body. The Kemetic word for that process is sahu. Now, what does this mean? In Kemet, the history and culture and philosophy of Kemet was rooted in a story, a mythology of Asar, Aset, and Heru. And Asar was murdered and was ultimately resurrected. His wife, Asar's wife, let me back up and let me put the story in its proper context. Asar was murdered by his brother, and his body was cut into multiple pieces. Aset searched and found all of the pieces of Asar's body. She literally washed his body, assembled all the parts together, anointed them with oils, and then wrapped his body in bandages, thus creating Sahu, the first mummy. And it took Aset 70 days to find the pieces of her husband's body and to funeralize him before she buried him. And so 70 days became the time frame for mummification in Kemet for the next 3,000 years. So Asar went into heaven, and he then became the symbol for the process of rebirth for every person who died in Kemet for the next 3,000 years. So it's a myth that has taken on gigantic proportions and has been modified in one form or another and spread all around the world, but it's a myth of African origins.
More MIP after this message. Look, just hearing you describing all these movies, The Mummy 1, The Mummy 2, the sequel. We need this. We need to move on this.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
absolutely. But dig this, man. But dig this. You mentioned The Mummy, right? Do you remember? So I'm sure you remember the first Mummy, which was Boris Karloff. It came out in 1939 or something like that. Do you remember, brother, the name of the mummy?
I actually don't.
Okay, his name was Imhotep. Wow. Okay, so when the movie was remade in 1999, and then they had a sequel in 2001. they also use that name and call that monster, that beast, Imhotep. So when I go to schools today and speak with young folk and show them an image of the step pyramid and mention Imhotep, they shriek, they pull back because they think of Imhotep and the mummy. So we're talking about putting our children in mental prisons, separating them from the glory of their ancestral legacy.
Well, and I've often said too, in this moment or this time where STEM is so emphasized and trying to create opportunities for our people in that field, I think one of the things that we missed out on, and I mean that was a struggle too, because we were all involved in the struggle for African-centered education. Imagine if our young people knew that science, and math and technology, all of that comes from them. It is indigenous to our culture and our ancestry. We are descendants of Imhotep. And so you get a different thing because now the cultural image, I mean, let's be honest, we have certain cultures that are promoted as predisposed to science and math.
Absolutely.
The Asian culture and the Indian culture, well, there's also Asia. But people from Asia, be they from China or India, we don't look at ourselves in that way, and nobody looks at us in that way. But imagine if our young people were to see that, and you're right, the image of Imhotep is just something hocus pocus or something on a TV screen rather than this was a multi-genius. I could be a multi-genius too. I could excel in this area as well. So folks, this is why we do this. This is why these kinds of conversations are important. Some terms we've got, folks, that I want to just go back over because we threw a lot at you. We're in the classroom now. The Sphinx. I want to be sure I had that pronunciation.
Aket. Aket. And Aket means Heru on the horizon, the place where the sun rises and sets.
But now wait a minute, Tony. You said the Sphinx, though. That term itself means stranglehold.
Okay, to strangle or to hold. So follow this. The Greek story of the Sphinx comes from the story of Sophocles, who wrote the story of King Oedipus. The story of Oedipus is a story of a Greek who was traveling along the road, and he was accosted by this monster called the Sphinx. And in Greek literature, the Sphinx was a monster with the head of a woman and the body of a lion. And she terrorized the people who walked along the road leading to Thebes in Greece. Now, Thebes in Greece is named after Thebes in Egypt, right? So the Sphinx would ask a question of any person who encountered it. And so that question is now known today as the riddle of the Sphinx. And those who play as Alpha Phi Alpha should know this, should be familiar with this. So the riddle of the Sphinx is what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening. And the more legs that it walks on, the weaker it becomes. Whoever could not answer this riddle was strangled by the Sphinx. Hence the word Sphinx means to strangle or to hold. So in the medical community, there are muscles in the body called sphincter muscles, which constrict. The pupil of your eye is a sphincter muscle. If you're in a room and you go outside in the bright sunlight, then the pupil of your eye is going to constrict in order to limit the amount of sunlight in your eye so that you can see. We are sitting on our sphincter muscles right now. And if they weren't working, we'd have to jump up to go to the bathroom to relieve ourselves. So it's interesting to know how Greek concepts have made their way into our language without us having a clear understanding of the origins of those words or even what those words mean.
Wow, that's amazing. That is something else. We're learning so much, folks. Also, just other terms. Mir, meta-nature for pyramid
right.
as well.
We learned. So what is meta-nature, brother? That's the second time you've used that word. What does that mean?
Well, you put me on. I don't.
Okay, I'll give it to you. Meta-nature is the Kemetic word for the writing which Greeks call hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics. Hiero means holy or sacred. Glyphics means writing. So hieroglyphics was sacred writing. So when the Greeks came into Kemet, they saw this language carved on the temples. They saw it written on papyrus, and they knew that this language was associated with temples and other sacred structures, hence the name hieroglyphics, sacred writings or sacred carvings. But to the people of Kemet, it was called Medu Necher. Medu means sacred, sacred, and Necher means the principles of the Creator. So the writing represents the sacred language of God.
Anthony Browder with us, folks. This is heavy, and we're learning about our history and our culture. Next time we meet, we'll get even more into that, because there's still some dispute, and maybe not as much as there used to be, about what the ancient Egyptians actually look like. So I'll ask Tony about that next time. Folks, we invite you to visit our very special guest, Anthony Browder, IKG-info.com, AsaRestorationProject.com. And of course, Tony, when people visit website, they can find out about the tours as well. Correct?
Absolutely. All the information is on the website.
We've got to do all that. African American History Month with Anthony Browder. Thanks, brother.
All right. My pleasure.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.